Enough,
This
is there enough time?
conference will now be recorded.
Hi there. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you, Melissa. How are you?
Doing great. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time to join me. What I wanted to chat with you about today, first of all, how is the editing coming? How's all the finalization coming with the book?
Really good. We have all our illustrations now, and we have all our diagrams, and it's all there. It's just adding in a few extra bits of advice, and then I think we're good to go.
Very exciting. I know there are a lot of people who have been asking me about it who are, very excited about getting to see it and everything else. And, I'm really, really excited to see the final product. And we
Yeah.
may end up being lucky enough to also have our friend John Duffy write a foreword, which would also be pretty awesome too. So very exciting stuff there.
Yeah.
Now, in addition to that, there's a lot of really disturbing news kind of happening right now. If you turn on, for example, anything, whether it's YouTube, the local news, the BBC, pretty much anything that you're looking at, we're getting a lot of feedback right now that, COVID is not something that's going away as quickly as, people want it to. I know here in the US, for example, obviously we've already started a lot of reopening efforts and things like that. And the really big challenge is that we're seeing record breaking cases every single day now that we've started to reopen. So for someone who's still at home, who's still isolating, what advice would you have in terms of dealing with general anxiety, in terms of, dealing with things like this, as well as also unplugging to stay healthy?
Okay, it's a great question, because it really covers the whole of humanity, really, because everyone's experiencing anxiety in different ways, in quite unusual ways, because it runs the full gamut of the experience. So you have children and young people who have been off school, and whereas on the surface that might be, sound great, but actually there's a huge amount of anxiety for them and for their parents about their education, about their exams, about their peer-to-peer interaction, how they're going to manage when they return. And it's very much the same in the workplace, for people considering going back to work, worrying about how they're going to interact with people, how they're going to integrate, what's changed, that they might have been left behind in some way. Again, there's the overwhelming health anxiety that's coming out of that as well, about how they're going to interact with each other in a safe way. Then there's like shops, they're reopening here at the moment now, and it won't be too much longer, I think, until they start to make sports and activities and things more accessible as well. So there's all sorts of anxieties going on for everybody, and I think what underpins all of it is the acceptance of change, that everything has changed. Fundamentally, everything has changed. It's changed the way we view ourselves and each other. It's changed how industry is run, with more and more people working from home and seeing the value in that. It's changed how we regard our environment, our attitudes, all the other really exciting events that have come out of COVID-19 as well, including Black Lives Matter, and really putting that really central into everybody's psyche at last. Everything's changing, everything, and that's okay. The trick with anxiety really is to be okay with uncertainty, because it's in the uncertainty where we feel like we're falling into a gap, like we feel like we don't have any control. So it's a matter of being accepting of that. It's okay to feel that way, but everything is changing, and it's changing for the better. Now, that's the thing. There's also opportunity in change. Every time there's a change, there's opportunity. So whether that's education, whether that's in employment, whether that's in your health, there's opportunity for growth, for personal growth, and for growth as a culture and as interacting societies. With health in particular, the body is far more resilient and robust than we tend to give it credit for, and it has a wisdom of its own. We are all adapting psychologically and biologically all the time to our environment, and more research is showing that actually there's a huge influence that the mind and the decisions and the choices we make in our heads, that has a huge influence over our biology, and that we can take quite a lot of control in healing ourselves through our psychology. And we're going to touch on that in the book as well. There's lots of amazing work going on at the moment all over the world that's just proving this time and time again. And I feel like, as part of the evolution of the COVID-19 situation, this is something that humanity is going to grasp with so much firmer than ever before, that we have a kind of internal healing system that's not rooted just in its biology, it's in our minds, and we can transform our anxieties into that self-care, because when we're anxious, it's because we're worrying about something we care about. So when we grasp that, we can transmute that into being our own healer.
Very nice. And so in terms of talking about that anxiety and this new kind of energy that we have that's kind of rising from COVID-19, obviously, there's a lot of, weird things going on in the world. We have the Black Lives Matter protests that are happening. We also have, pretty much everything else, across the world and things changing. How do you think that people can best harness this energy for change and, basically work to make it as positive as possible in their lives? And, how can people bring on board things like former employers who never would allow remote work in the past, in the future? I know I saw a really, really interesting article actually in Forbes, which I think will be an interesting topic of conversation I want to mention here. And it was talking about essentially how offices now can no longer be communal. So no longer can there be a communal coffee pot. There can't be, desks that are next to each other. So if you remember a long time ago, we all used to have our own little offices. And then we went from offices to working in kind of like pods. So like open spaces where everybody's sitting at the same table. There's not a lot of social distancing. So now they're actually saying that for companies to actually return to making people go into offices, there are going to be individually wrapped snacks, 6 feet of distancing, no common shared spaces like kitchens and things like that. And in addition to that, desks are going to have to be, basically 6 to 12 feet apart, completely isolated. So basically, how do you think that people could actually use that kind of information to possibly get a company that had never considered remote work before to be a possibility in the age of COVID-19? So I guess that's like a two-pronged question.
Okay. Yeah, but I think with the rise of Industry 4.0 as well as Education 4.0, and in my view, Religion 4.0, which is also emerging as well, there's never been a better time to have those conversations. And just as I was saying before about actually transmuting your anxiety into self-care, you take those difficult conversations, you embrace the awkwardness. The awkwardness is there because there's something important. We don't feel awkward about things that don't matter. So there's a clue in the emotion that we have. And if we're wanting to have a conversation with our employers or with our staff, and we know it's going to be difficult, then that's all the more reason just to do it. Don't worry about how you're saying it or when you're saying it or the tone of an email or anything like that. Just do it. This is a time for action, and it's a time for sharing. And with that in mind, as well as like the evolution of like smart factories and smart offices and all those kinds of infrastructure, it's not just the upgrading of the technology and the upgrading of the spaces in which they are being held, it's the upgrading of the people as well. And I think that it's going to be absolutely crucial that employers really invest in the psychology, the transpersonal aspects of their workforce, as well as like how they interact with their customers, because otherwise there's not going to be coherence between the human element and potentially the AI element, as that's evolving as well. And this is really a matter of consciousness. This is really about sharing our understanding of growth and of how we learn. And so the fact that we have Zoom and we have Skype and we have just about every kind of platform available means that remote working is easier than ever. And it also means that people are integrating into the technology itself as well. It's becoming a very natural part of day-to-day life as well as day-to-day business. And so any anxieties that are being felt are really just indicators that the change is already happening and the conversation needs to be had. It's really is embrace the awkwardness. That's always sort of my sentiment, really.
Nice. And I know one thing that I saw too that was very interesting recently in that same article was discussing not only is it a huge financial burden for people to actually still try to go into a real environment, a non-virtual environment anymore, but in addition to that, basically employees are now 45 to 50% more productive at home because they are able to adjust their work environment to what is best and most accommodating for them. Like I know for myself personally, From my own experience, I used to work with one of the big four consulting agencies here in the US. And I used to drive 3 hours each way to work every day. So by the time that I got to work, I was so exhausted and so burnt out. And you'd think that being one of the largest tech consulting companies in the US, that they would be open to telework or something like that, but they weren't, because they felt that if they didn't have your butt in a seat right in front of them so that they could monitor everything that you were doing, you weren't actually being productive. And, that's just crazy. So, kind of what are your thoughts on that? And also, why is it that you think that some people are better, in their own environment and other people can function just fine in a traditional office?
It really comes down to individual personalities, really. I mean, there's always been a problem in the workplace where the workers haven't been respected as people who want to get on and do a good job. It's always been this mentality that the workers must be made to work and they must be monitored all the time. I mean, that is the source of so much anxiety for people, because it comes down to performance anxiety. It comes down to being acceptable enough, to be
Hmm.
good enough. And there's also creates an artificial atmosphere of competition between people. Again, this is sort of where I'm thinking that, having a coherence with the technology as it develops as well, is going to reduce that, because we're not going to be in competition with the technology, we're going to be working with it, right?
Hmm.
So for everybody's progress, everybody's development. Um, and the thing about the commute is so spot on. I was thinking about that myself. I used to commute like crazy numbers of miles every day to go and to work with clients in a part of Manchester here. And I was spending more time doing that than I was actually on the phones and working with people. And it was exhausting. And for me, I'm sure it's the same for a lot of people, the journey was the source of the anxiety for me, not the
Yes.
workplace. So, if you remove that, if you're removing unnecessary sources of anxiety, such as competition and confrontation in a workplace, and the commute, the travel, and
Hmm.
perhaps relationship dynamics in a workplace as well. If you're removing those, then all that energy and focus can be put into the work itself. As long as people, if they are working from home and they're creating their ideal space where they feel comfortable and they feel nurtured, as long as they are having time to get away from that as well, that their home doesn't become an office,
Yes.
because gradually, other anxieties will start to creep in there as well. It's important that people are getting out and meeting people, face to face, so that we don't all end up becoming reclusive, because that would be quite unhelpful.
Yeah.
And again, the technologies that we all have, it just we're in such a pivotal moment in history where everything is changing, but we can actually embrace it for personal growth as well as business growth, as well as cultural growth. There's just so much opportunity right now. So feeling anxious about it is a good thing. It shows you care. I would say harness the awkwardness of that and have those conversations, send those emails. They don't have to be perfect. They don't have to be even particularly on point, because there are so many questions everybody has right now.
Absolutely. So let's talk very briefly about anxiety in relationships, because I'm sure everyone who's been locked down with their significant other for a while has probably gone through some conflicts and some challenges and things like that. In terms of advice, what would you give to someone if they're experiencing any challenges or any disagreements with their significant other because they are in too tight of a quarter at the moment?
I think that the answer really there is space. And I know that's very difficult when people are locked down and they literally have a lack of space. If you can't take advantage of space around you, I'd suggest that you turn to inner space, because your mind is so expansive, it has no limits.
Of course.
So taking time out to meditate, to engage in mindfulness practice, doing things on your own, is really, really important. It's really healthy, because you're also creating space for that other person as well. It's another key thing to do would be to be engaging with other people. So whether it's phone calls, whether it's Zoom, Skype, whatever, whether it's forums, Facebook, just reaching out to other people and sharing how they feel. Again, embracing any awkwardness in the conversation, because it's really a marker of how much you care about something and that something needs to be talked about.
Of
And
course.
appropriate, of course, as well, to be sure that there's any appropriate services or helpful phone numbers and helplines and things available for anybody that's in crisis, and making sure
Excellent.
that we're looking out for each other.
Well, thank you so much. I think this was very enlightening, and hopefully this will be helpful for our audience as well. And they have a lot to look forward to with the book coming up very, very soon.
I hope so.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.